Thank you all for being here. My name is Glen Whitehead, co-director of the music program, and most of you, all of you know who I am, I believe. Are there any new students here starting this semester? Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you have any questions or anything afterwards, please come up and see me or another faculty. My talk today is called Take It Outside, People, Bridging Ecoacoustics and Improvised Music, and this talk is based on an article that was published last spring in the Journal of Critical Improvisation Studies out of the University of Guelph, and it's based on work that I've been doing for the past several years, and it ramped up in a different way, took sort of a left turn when COVID hit in some ways, so it was kind of a strange, in some ways I was already halfway there with some of this research and ideas coming out of this. So here we go. The era of COVID-19 has profoundly shaken the foundations of many aspects of our lives. Our event venues closed for months, the spaces and support systems that we depend on for delivering works of art and connecting audiences were shuttered, suspended in indefinite silence. In response, musicians turned to largely one place, the digital virtual world, struggling to compensate for the living art of music performance and practice. While the digital world has been an increasingly important collaborative interface, my impulse was also to explore the opposite direction as a musician and improviser and take it outside. My goal in this talk is to bridge our applied engagement across both environmentally based sound practices and improvised music creation. I aim to connect our understanding of these fields by, one, contextualizing environmental immersive theory and experiences found in first-person field recording as an improvisational and musical act, and two, proposing how environmental immersive practices fuse directly into improvisational music practice and methodology. Even before the challenge of COVID-19, our musical educational institutions have been seeking to establish new theoretical systems that move us beyond the long-standing dominance of Western music ideologies. Listening-based immersive participation is at the center of the fields of acoustics and soundscape ecology. These practices often involve multi-sensational acts of listening and responding in natural environments through sound. Meanwhile, the field of critical improvisation has expanded to connect to a tapestry of multidisciplinary inquiries, culminating with George Lewis's and Benjamin Pickett's two-volume Handbook of Critical Improvisation Studies, with contributions from scholars, practitioners, and artists from architecture, anthropology, art history, computer science, cognitive science, cultural studies, dance, and many, many more. I postulate here that a shared fundamental human taskscape, a term borrowed from anthropology, that is simultaneously improvisational and musical, lies deep within the behavioral systems inherent to both improvised music and environmentally based sound practices. Both these fields are imbued with methodologies for engaging with interactive dynamics and uncanny serendipity, or the unexpected event, in a shared time and space. Both explore the relationships between the observer and sound. Both center on the experience of and study around the present or passing moment as the primary place of research and creation systems. Improvised music is far too vast in scope to pinpoint without explanation. Oh, hold on one second. Let me go back to that slide here. So this is Professor of Geography Brandon Vogt, and he's standing in Zapata Falls, which is right near the Great Sand Dunes, and this is during our class. We teach a joint class called Sonic Landscapes. If any of you are interested in this class, we are teaching, it's a VAPA 33,000 level class and an upper division music elective combined with geography students. We're teaching this again this May, right after the end of the semester. So if you're interested, get in touch with me. Thank you. Little plug. Improvised music is far too vast in scope to pinpoint without explanation. Here I am referring generally to the practice understood largely as free improvisation. While attempts at unified definitions of free improvisation have articulated a broader understood canon, This opaque musical arena as a whole is resistant to ontological essentialism and defined more for its diversity of approaches and perspectives than as one genre in of itself. This elasticity makes it possible to merge with a similarly malleable arena of environmental engagements. In the past few decades, environmentally based sound practices, including the interrelated tapestry of fields such as acoustic ecology, ecoacoustics, and soundscape ecology, have become increasingly interdisciplinary. Beyond artistic arenas, the practitioners of these fields have drawn connections to a range of disciplines such as biology, geography, ecology, climate change studies, architecture, and city planning, to name a few. In that sense, this essay builds upon the pioneering work of Pierre Schaeffer, Pauline Oliveros, Hildegard Westerkamp, Barry Truax, and Ania Lockwood, among others, as well as more recent contributions by Matthew Bertner, Leah Barclay, Francisco Lopez, Andrea Poli, Viv Corringham, and more who identify field recording or sonification as part of their artistic practice. The artistic frame of first-person field recording, common across many environmental sound practices, has also become its own kind of canon. Similarly, the performer-composer, quote, practitioner as artist, unquote, approach conjoins quite gracefully, right with possibilities to connect to environmental approaches and compositional practices. I have found remarkably similar experiences between improvised music practices and field recording activities. Bringing them together through an examination of their shared theoretical underpinnings may reveal how we can then reconcile them as intuitively linked. One of the characteristics of musical improvisation on which many of my ideas hinge is that process is at the core of much improvised music methodology, particularly as it is conjoined with the promise, quote, promise of an unforeseeable outcome, a trait shared by all things improvisational. Similarly, in environmental immersive practices, the reliance on an understood time-based process within the random interplay of nature is paramount. As the COVID-19 pandemic has challenged the fundamental ability for people to make music face-to-face, this new reality also revealed profound opportunities of listening as musicking. The prominent pianist and composer Vijay Iyer, who theorized recently that listening embodies similar behavior and critical systems as musical improvisation. Listening is an act of improvisation, particularly when listening is in the context of live improvised music. Iyer explains that, quote, the experience of listening to music that is understood to be improvised differs significantly from listening knowingly to composed music. The main source of drama in improvised music is the sheer fact of the shared sense of time, the sense that the improviser is working, creating, generating musical material, and the same time in which we are co-performing as listeners. End quote. I build on Iyer's concept of the listener as co-performer, especially in improvised music contexts. Using this model, I offer that the act of listening and decision-making inherent in environmental immersive activities represents a similar musicking experience. Otherwise stated, applied environmentally based sound work positions the listener as improviser and co-performer. The search for interesting environmental interactive sonic phenomena entails critical real-time decisions. Moreover, the act of field recording as the embodiment of such immersive environmental listening engages similarly with the improvisation of living systems. Soundscape ecology strives to reconcile sonic interactivity, subjective perceptions, and empirical data across anthrophonies, biophonies, and geophonies into a complete picture. The core concepts of these fields can be reframed as musical and improvisational ideas into a broader tapestry of critical and music theory for free improvisation. For instance, the sound toe, a core terminology in soundscape studies, is the acoustic result of vocalizing animals and living things in a shared geography, from its minimum to maximum scale. From the platform of the sound tope, the sonotope
is the total scope of overlap and impact of all possible sounds and sources. The term ecotone, however, becomes even closer to an improvisational frame. It refers to spaces within the environment where biodiversity interacts most intensely, where actions and decisions of living systems may come with the highest consequences. At the heart of an ecotone is a focused geographical intensity defined as the edge effect, as Elmo Farina explains, the preeminent soundscape studies scientist. At the ecotones, many processes find a strong constraint called the edge effect. The edge effect in most cases enhances biodiversity, but also other processes such as predation. Ecotones are also considered ecological traps, or sink areas, in which species attracted by their structure and food abundance experience a higher predatory pressure or habitat disturbance. It is reasonable to consider that as for vegetation and animal distribution, ecotones exist also for other phenomena such as the sonic environment. Here's an example of just such a center encountered on a concert tour residency trip to Australia a few years ago in Tasmania on a solo silent jungle walk. I came across two Tasmanian devils, literally, fighting over a piece of food, which I think was some kind of animal carcass. And I came across this, so the idea, the spirit within this talk in many ways is the surprise factor and the kind of strange phenomena that one can come across. And this literally happened right in front of my eyes and ears. Similarly, in his foundational writings on improvisation, George Lewis links the elements of listening, doing, surprise, place, space, and intentionality. Lewis builds on French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's work, whose work emphasized the corporal nature of social life and stressed the role of practice and embodiment in social dynamics. His notion of habitus, the general definition of which comprises socially ingrained habits, skills, and dispositions. It is the way that individuals perceive the social world around them and react to it. One element of this is through imitation, or mimesis, and through improvisation, which Bourdieu describes as the durably installed generative principle of regulated improvisation. And I quote Lewis, "Following Bourdieu, I want to sketch in outline form some characteristics of an emerging new definition of improvisation. First, one that imagines that such a definition would be receptive to both production, doing, and reception, listening, or rather, would view listening as a form of doing. Similar to Vijay's idea, this concept suggests that the improvisation of listening and reception as an embodied, immersive experience that would also imply the notion of transduction through the immersion of both doing and reception. The idea of transduction here, lifting off Lewis's notion of habitus, situates the environmental immersive experience itself as a holistic act of transductive improvisation. As Julian Henrique states in his work on transduction of musical performance, the human body, quote, can be considered a sensory transducer and experience the, quote, transformation of sonic energy to kinetic energy, end quote. Pianist and transdisciplinary scholar Paul de Assis of the Orpheus Institute explains a similar idea. He states, the main transducer interface, however, is a human body, a complex living organism inhabited by diverse layers of information and by innumerable drives, which working together shape the actual rendering of musical events, end quote. I would argue there is a core connection between this transductive process, from what occurs in what one experiences, listening and doing, both in the field as a sound practitioner and the production embodied experience of free improvisation. A related concept, hyexity, is useful here to bring more focus to the importance of the ever-present, quote, moment in time of improvisation, end quote, in the processes of both performance and environmental immersion. This idea, hyexity, embodies a philosophy of the essence of a quote-unquote thing. It explains qualities that make something this. Hyexity is a concept repurposed here, identifies the time-centered element within human transductive processes as a thing unto itself which speaks to the physical molecular movements within the singularity of events in time. Assis explains how hyexity, quote, dramatizes space-time itself, curving it, folding it, giving it transient form and temporal structure. Coincidentally, this concept also resonates with the keen terminologies in soundscape ecology, as explained above, as the sonotone, ecotone, and most importantly, the edge effect. Referring to the zone of interlacing phenomena where direct interaction takes place in the natural world at any given moment in time, Assis offers an angle on the idea of hyexity applying to the performing arts, micro-hyexities. And this is the one that's really important here. He explains, when appropriating this terminology for the performing arts, music, dance, theater, or performance, etc., I propose the introduction of the notion of microhexity, collapsing the experience into an infinitesimal fraction of a second. This concept is useful to flesh out the idea of the performer and sound artist as transducer. As he continues, microhexities are high-energy loaded and high-speed moving singularities that carry a force of potential from one position to the next. They make up the visible or audible part of artistic transductive processes. End quote. Again, there is a similar idea in soundscape ecology that drills down to the singular moment, the edge effect, as we just learned before. Here we see the connections between environmentally based sound practices and improvisation rooted in their shared approaches of listening and generating. We interact in microhyexities in both contexts. Quote, there is no time for contemplation. Things must happen in the unavoidable urgency and imperative sequentially of the here and now. Ideas of such possible connections first sparked for me during the 2012 Ecosonal Institute in Alaska, directed by Alaskan composer Matthew Bertner. Bertner's approach was the first I encountered to combine comprehensively science, climate studies, technology, composition, as well as the unique immersion of human musical performance and improvisation. While much of the work placed field recording and technology at the center of ecoacoustic activities, Bertner purposely marginalized technology theoretically, deeming it less significant when compared to the human experience. The immersive experiences of environmental sonic discovery and ecosona were familiar to me because they mirrored being inside an improvisational musical creation experience. This conscious recognition opened my senses, and through many following environmental sonic adventures, led to one serendipitous experience after another, much like the serendipity one can experience inside an ensemble engaged in free improvisation. Almost from the outset, this new branch of music creation expanded my musical vocabulary as a trumpet artist in ways I didn't expect, and immediately, in ongoing practice, connected my field experiences with instrumental music creation in improvised context. For example, from my recent CD, Living Daylights, published in 2019, this trio recording involved longtime collaborator and one of our UCCS online faculty members, Scott Walton, and a UCCS alumnus drummer, Britt Kayampa. And the core concept behind this CD is this: the Living Daylights is based on natural phenomena that play with our perceptions of space, time, and place, and rendered with a loosely structured improvisational system that enables many possibilities within the natural restraints of a conscious system. little excerpt from this piece called 42 Degrees. 42 Degrees references the connection of people and light reflected in the observations of rainbows. When we see a rainbow and its band of colors, we are looking at light refracted and reflected from the different raindrops at an angle between 40 and 42 degrees at all points of view, whether one person is high on a hilltop and another hundreds of feet below. Light orients to our visual senses. Our lenses orient the angle of light. Specifically, you'll notice that the melodic line is constructed for its momentum to be driven by a sense of wind-sweeping, churning, changing timbres, connecting the idea of a rainbow to wind, weather, and expanse. Unlike so much of what we conceive in music as having a single identity of sound, sound in nature is almost always a moving, shifting palette of evolving layers of timbre. As the description of the CD implies, the nature of collective participation in music creation through improvisation is paramount. Part of this methodology resonates with ideas such as self-organizing systems and nonlinear systems. David Borgo offers succinct ideas on the ideas of self-organizing systems as an improvisational system. SOS are most commonly comprised of numerous individual agents that are autonomous, but also exhibit a high degree of interconnectivity. SOSs, self-organizing systems, are also inherently uncontrollable. One result from my Alaska experience was the creation of my first ecoacoustic improvisational piece out of field recordings of this extraordinary day with bubblenet feeding of humpback whales, entitled Mysticeti. This piece is layered with sounds of whales calling to each other, coordinating their bubblenet feeding choreography amidst the sounds of melting glaciers and faraway sounds of ships. I have performed this piece in many places around the world, and on tour with Matthew Burton and the Ecosono Ensemble and festivals. Well, this is a still from this moment when the pod of bubblenet whales surfaced right next to the boat. And here's a little bit of a performance from the Technosonics Festival at the University of Virginia. further contextualize these connections, according to musicologist Gary Tomlinson of Yale University, a reorientation of the development of the human mind, which advanced the species, came uniquely from a phenomenon that in the human experience seems to underlie our general capacity to attend to and correlate sequences of events around us. In his book, A Million Years of Music, human beings long ago developed the consciousness to think at a distance. That leap embodied a, quote, release from proximity, whereby humans gradually gained the capacity to imagine things not present to the senses, end quote. Tomlinson puts the ability that developed into musicking as the point of genesis for these remarkable evolutionary developments. As the free improvisation pioneer Derek Bailey from England postulates, mankind's first musical performance couldn't have been anything but an improvisation. Certainly, these early human improvisations must be contextualized within the spaces and places of their natural environments, as well as within communities of both human and non-human species. Clarinetist, improviser, and environmental researcher David Rothenberg has developed a unique environmental practice, improvising with various animal communities across the globe, including birds, whales, wolves, and more. He asserts that, quote, even a tiny bird brain can be attuned to the magic of organized sound, where the form might be greater than the function, beauty ever resident and present long before we were able to learn from its ways and hear the opposite of time. In the Oxford Handbook of Critical Improvisation Studies, Rothenberg writes, interspecies improvisation 101 should be a sanctioned part of our music education system. First learn to listen, pick up on the structure and inflection of the sounds animals are making. Take it in as an unknown musical world, and take it seriously by preparing yourself to join in. Improvisation, ecoacoustic, soundscape ecology, and all the intersecting fields discussed here manifest diverse ideas of a larger, interconnected, deeply embodied community. For instance, in June 2020, I participated in the West Bend residency, situated 2 hours east of Toronto. The West Bend Composer-Performer Residency articulates a collaborative creative vision that would usually be an immersive experience with the surrounding natural world of the residency location. However, like so many situations, this residency also went virtual due to the pandemic. Here I worked with vocalist-composer A.P. Bergeron from Quebec, guitarist Spencer Friedman from Queens, New York, percussionist Gordon Fry from Nichols, Florida. We created a project utilizing concepts of environmental improvisation as explained in the project description. This composition was created through a process of environmental improvisation and field recordings. Each member contributed material from explorations of their local geographies, contemplating serendipity, scale, proximity, and distance between themselves, their surroundings, and each other. This resulted in the composition Sure. Nothing happening? There we go. In fall 2020, I also put some of these ideas in this article to test with 2 outdoor concerts under the theme Take It Outside, People, in the Peak Frequency Concert Series offered in the music program here. The first was the Colorado Springs-based Meyer Dance Company, Denver-based improvisation ensemble, the Bottesini Project, and also included a new composition by visiting professor Dr. John Forshee titled Anti-Borderland. Some of you may have been a part of this. Here we have, this is Pauline Oliveros, who visited us in 2009, actually, which was an amazing residency by her. And here's a little excerpt from that concert.
So
This was actually the inaugural concert of the UCCS Symphony 21, the very first performance of that group. In 2019, I did a solo concert and residency tour across 4 European countries, England, Ireland, Switzerland, and France. As usual, I included as many field trips as I could in my favorite combination of activities in such a trip, traveling and concertizing in new places, sprinkled with environmental sonic exploration. And here is an example of a piece based on some field recordings that's going to be part of an upcoming CD that will be released this year. And the interesting thing here, I was in Millau, France, and experienced the most violent windstorm I've ever encountered on this trip. It was even worse than the one we had about a month ago here. And you'll notice, like, the way the wind was working on this particular day, it wasn't just, the speed of the wind, it was the ripping effect and the chaotic effect of going many different directions and changing directions very violently. It was pretty extraordinary. Let me see how I'm going to do this. There we go. Acknowledging the listener as improviser, immersed along with a living, dynamic environment, receptive and responsive to earthly events is an embodiment of empathy. At heart, this comprehensive approach is a call to explore empathy as a deeper, long-term methodology. In the age of COVID-19, climate crisis, and earnest calls for systemic changes of social and racial justice, it is crucial that activism as a proactive force be understood and recognized as multidimensional and heterogeneous, with frames of knowledge coming from a myriad of orientations to the world. Why is it important to acknowledge improvisational processes into environmental music-making systems and cultures? George Lipsitz provides a larger answer of the essence of improvisation as a cultural attribute, writing that improvisation appeals to us because it is work that makes a difference in the world. It compels us to leave our comfort zones, to forge meaningful interactions with others across categories and social identities, to deepen the democratic strata of society through cultural activities that resonate fully with the contradictions and possibilities of our time. Improvisation in both expressive cultural and social movement mobilizations can keep us attentive to our responsibility to build the world we hope to inhabit. Guitarist and free improvisation pioneer Derek Bailey's assertion that a good improvisation is a, quote, celebration of the moment, end quote, succinctly sums up the improvisational experiences of both music creation and environmental field practices. Reminiscent again also of the idea of microhaxities. In this moment of mask-wearing, social distancing, and concerns about enclosed spaces, I urge you to celebrate the moment and take it outside. Hopefully we'll also have plenty to celebrate post-COVID-19, particularly if we can build on the new challenges and opportunities in front of us and push ourselves to expand our horizons. And thank you very much. Now I can see you. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Yes.
What initially sparked your love of ecoacoustics?
Well, I think I had a natural affinity for it in some regard. I mean, I love nature. I love being outside. I mean, it's nothing new to most people, right? But when I first encountered ecoacoustics really in its really concrete form was with Matthew Bertner and the Ecosono Institute. And I had sort of, I think without ever realizing it, hoping I would find some way to participate in a more holistic way with natural environments and exploration with music making. And so when I started actually doing the practice of field recording with headphones, that's when things really started to click for me. That it was more than just going on a hike. It was more than just, experiencing nature. It was something a little bit deeper. And after I learned a little bit about ecoacoustics and acoustic ecology, for instance, learning to take a few extra levels into the experience. It's so, for instance, like you practice being immersive. You practice being fully immersive in the environment. And there's something about that consciousness that changes things, at least in the experience of it. And it feels like the natural world starts to react towards you. Maybe they're always doing this, but you notice it a little bit more. They react to you in different ways. Everything knows you're there, right? And the fact that you're concentrating really hard and deeply and listening intently, you hear more things. You encounter more things that happen. And because you're so much more conscious of it, things happen. I mean, it really is the strangest thing. I've had so many incredible experiences out there, and some aren't. I mean, most of them are wonderful, and some of them are not pleasant either. So that's the gist of it. It's like very experiential. If you've ever taken part or participated in free improvisation settings, that's one of my favorite things to do in music. Is free improvisation. It's completely open. There are sort of codes and rules of conduct that are similar to being in a group of people, being at a party. shared spaces and shared consciousness that is just similar out there in the world as well. And I've taken that, I've just experienced it in very intensely different ways inside in a music ensemble presence as well. Yeah. Good question. Yeah.
So, do you often bring your instrument when you go hiking?
Not generally just going hiking, but yes. But when I'm sort of choosing, yes, to go out someplace new and bring my horn with me. And I've been known to bring it places where I shouldn't bring it. Climbing a mountain in Alaska in the middle of summer once, when it turned out to be like a pretty treacherous climb. And I've got my trumpet on my back, and get up there, and people asking me, like, what do you have that for? But throughout my travels, like in Australia, we went and really explored in the jungle in Queensland and Tasmania and bring it with me. And performed, played, improvised with nature. And also recording those things, and some of those examples ending up on CD material or used in compositions that I create after the fact.
Do you ever do ensemble work, like on these?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something I do here in the class Sonic Landscapes. This is something I do with students when the time is right and the weather is right in the right classes. And also professionally with colleagues, I've done that in many locations. Alaska, Australia, in Europe. And it's a pretty amazing scenario because it's very, very different. It's remarkably different than an ensemble room or inside, or even kind of just playing outside here when you go into a foreign natural environment. It really does expand your musical vocabulary. You start playing and responding to a different time world. It's not really a musical time world, it's a natural-based time world that in some ways is much more patient. And sometimes there can tend to be a lot more space between the notes. Music is moving at a much slower rate. And it's kind of interesting in that way to experience music in a very different way. Good question. Yes, David.
It seems like trumpet is particularly well suited to ecoacoustics because of the wind piece. How does your experience as a trumpet player inform this scholarly piece of your work?
So that's a great question, because usually the question's the other way around. That's absolutely right. The trumpet. I think every instrument can work in its own way and is very unique. If violin made out of wood, and things vibrating together. For instance, there's something about the trumpet for me that is very similar in nature, very corporal, of like animal calls, and wildlife interaction and communication. And the mimicry aspect of it, the kind of trying to immerse yourself in those sounds in real time when you're in it. And you also get responses. Like it's interesting the kinds of birds you attract when you're playing, if they're around. They come and check you out. With whales was really, really incredible. With humpback whales, because it's very, very trumpet-like, And I view the trumpet in, many instruments, but the trumpet is my instrument as an instrument of the earth. It's forged and it's created, but it's made of materials of the earth, and it has a sonic reality that is sort of beyond human in some ways. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate being here, especially with the driving conditions still pretty compromised in some places. So drive safe, have a good weekend, and we'll see you again.